Bismillah, in the next section of our textbook, Imam Mansur ibn Yunus al-Bahuti rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, Babun fi siwaki wa ghayri, yusannu at-tasawwuku ardan biyusrahu bi'udin layyin min nahwi arakin, ويكره لصائم بعد الزوال ويتأكد عند صلاة وانتباه والتغير فم ويبتدئ بجانب فمه الأيمن ويدهن غبا ويكتحل وترا. Here we're talking about siwak and other personal hygiene issues. So we're going to be looking at the meaning of siwak, and then we're going to highlight just a few of some issues that should be considered when taking care of your personal hygiene. So siwak and miswak, both these terms refer to the stick which is used to brush the teeth. And many of us are already familiar with that. A miswak or a siwak, same thing. The word siwak, however, also refers to the act itself. Siwak is the act of cleaning the teeth. Miswak, however, does not refer to the act. It merely refers to the stick. That's just a point of linguistics for you to keep in mind. Legally, what does the word siwak mean? It means to use a stick to clean the teeth, gums, tongue, and the roof of the throat. When we're using the word siwak, obviously we're talking about it from a religious perspective, and that's what it refers to. So the Imam says it is recommended to brush the teeth, and this is at all times. The scholars are in agreement that siwak, using a siwak, is a highly stressed recommendation or sunnah. And it was encouraged by the Prophet ﷺ, something that he did on a regular basis. This is illustrated by the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, siwak purifies the mouth and is pleasing to the Lord. It's matharatun lil fam wa mardatun lil rabb. This was reported by Imam al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad ibn Khuzaymah, as well as reported by al-Bukhari in some of his works, ta'liqan, basically what's mentioned. And we'll perhaps talk about that another time. Of course, there's an exception of it being recommended at all times. There's an exception to that. The exception is for someone who's fasting. Right? And there is some detail to that ruling, which we'll discuss shortly. The manner in which you use the siwak is horizontally meaning this way, from right to left or left to right, back and forth, as opposed to up and down. And this is so not to damage the gums. Going up and down with the stick, you can see that motion going up into the gums. It's very likely that doing so will harm the gums, cut, damage, and could lead to dental problems in the future. There's also a hadith, by the way, which is narrated by Abu Dawood in his Marasil, which states, if you perform siwak, then do so vertically. So there you go, there's something narrated in that regard. It's also mentioned in Ash-Sharh al-Kabir by Abdurrahman ibn Qudama, who was the nephew of the Ibn Qudama. It states that cleaning the tongue or throat can be done vertically. So normally we're talking about horizontally for the teeth, and the tongue, it can be done vertically this way, up and down, the same way with the throat. Either way, it makes no difference. It is done with a soft, moist stick fashioned with the arak tree, or fashioned from the arak tree. Or it can be some other type of wood, in this case, like a palm tree or an olive tree, which will clean the teeth without causing damage or cutting the gum. So you can use any type of tree that will fulfill those basic conditions. It will clean the teeth, and it will not cut the gums or damage the mouth in any way, and it will not fall apart. It's disliked to use a type of tree or wood that causes harm or falls apart when using it in the mouth. There are some mentioned examples of those in the more expansive works. It should be held in the left hand, and this is because cleaning the mouth is a process which removes disliked things, whether that's odor or plaque, yellowness of the teeth, etc. And we talked about which hand we employ for what types of things, or what side we prefer for different types of things, like entering the restroom or entering the home, entering the masjid. And the same goes for this case. The cleaning power of this tool, of this stick or the brush, is based on its ability to actually remove plaque and remove any odors. So if it doesn't do that, if it doesn't have this level of cleaning power, it won't remove plaque, it won't remove any, foreign bodies from the mouth, it won't remove the odor, then it obviously defeats the purpose, and so therefore it is considered disliked. Also, the hadith of Aisha radiallahu anha, in the event that somebody says, well, wait a minute, why are we using the left hand? Shouldn't we be using the right? Because there is a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ preferred the right when possible in purification, brushing his hair, putting on his sandals, and siwak. He preferred the right here through these things and siwak. But this is to be understood, this hadith is not that he used his right hand for the siwak, but he began on the right side of the mouth. He began on the right side of the mouth as opposed to using the right hand. He used the left hand here. The conclusion is that the left hand is to be used because, again, it's removal of unwanted things from the mouth. So the siwak, is disliked after the zawal. Basically, now we're talking about for someone fasting, be it a dry or more stick while fasting, even if the person is fasting continuously, which is al-wisal. This is based on the hadith which states, the breath of one fasting is better with Allah than the aroma of musk. This is muttafaqun alayh, because this type of breath typically appears after dhuhr time, which is the zawal. The rulings have been established at that specific time. This ruling regarding it's, disliked after the zawal, it's been established because this is when that breath is typically produced. And brushing the teeth at this time removes the traces of worship. Right? So the khuluf fam as-sa'im, which is referred to in the hadith, is a kind of a sign of worship or a trace of fasting. And it's something that should not be removed because it's recommended to leave behind those signs of worship, much like the blood of a martyr. Says it is recommended for one fasting to use a dry miswak for the zawal because the Prophet ﷺ was noted to have done so. And this is reported by Imam Ahmad, Abu Dawud, and at-Tirmidhi. He also said from the best characteristics of the fasting is siwak, which is a hadith found in Ibn Majah. So both of these hadith, though they may appear to be general, are to be applied to the time before the zawal. So here we have multiple hadith. They could appear to be contradictory, and a ruling especially about using the siwak after the zawal. So obviously the breath of the one fasting is better than the aroma of musk, and when that breath, comes about, the indication in this hadith that it should be left, and then the, Prophet ﷺ using a siwak while fasting, and, these things may weigh on a person's mind and say, well, wait a minute, this is why the Hanabila and these madhabs, they just don't use dalil. A person may be worried about that because it's seemingly contradictory here. How could the madhab say disliked and talk about the zawal as the time after that being disliked, and then we can see these clear hadith? So this is a great example of how you can see the Hanabila, and it could also illustrate how other madhab use evidence. They use multiple hadith to arrive at a comprehensive conclusion. Instead of taking one hadith and just saying, oh, this hadith says that, so we're going to do it, they have to look at all of the corpus, the entire corpus of hadith collections, all of them, and then they don't reject one and take the other, but what they try and do is reconcile between the two, or between the three or four or whatever they've collected in the issue. And if they're able to reconcile between these evidences, which may appear to be contradictory, then they make such a reconciliation. And this is preferred over now trying to figure out if one is weak or rejected or abrogated, etc. And on top of that, there's also a narration found in al-Bayhaqi's collection which states, if you fast, use the miswak in the morning and not in the evening. So there you can get something a little bit more explicit in regards to setting up that time, even though someone may question the authenticity of this particular hadith. Right, so the basic principle still applies in terms of reconciliation between hadith, and then in the event that there is something explicit, then obviously we have a better and more clear explanation Imam goes on and he says, the siwak is emphasized in both use and reward. It's emphasized, muta'akkid, yata'akkid here, in both use and reward before prayer, based on a hadith. It says, if I wasn't to create difficulty upon my followers, I would order them to use the siwak at every prayer. This was reported by al-Jama'ah, which basically means Imam Ahmad and Ashab al-Sunan. And this order here is obligatory in nature, as supported by the narration in Imam Ahmad's collection, which says, I would have obligated, faridtu, right? So the first one says, umirtu, or amartuhum bis-siwak, amartuhum, I ordered them, and the other one is using the word farada, faradtuhum bis-siwak. So here, again, the collection of both of these hadith, you can see how we would arrive at the understanding that it would have been obligated, meaning it would have been prescribed and ordained. Also, when waking, it's recommended to use the siwak when waking from either a day or night sleep. As Aisha radiallahu anha, she reported him saying that, or in her hadith report, that he would not lie down during the day or night except that he would use the siwak before making wudu. And due to bad breath, be it the result of eating odorous food or anything else. So basically, I mean, the idea is to maintain, a freshness of breath. And, these are multiple such scenarios in which that may change. It's also recommended when making wudu, before rinsing the mouth, at al-madmada, right before you do the madmada, which is to rinse the mouth, you use the siwak. Also, before reciting the Quran, before entering the masjid, entering the home, after a long period of silence, when the stomach has been empty for some time, and when the teeth begin to yellow. Obviously, that's another time in which it's recommended to use the siwak. When using the siwak, Imam says starting on the right side of the mouth is recommended, and we talked about that before, and this is based on that hadith. And as stated in al-Iqna'a, this is done by beginning with the right incisor. The incisor is the two front teeth. So you begin with the right incisor, and you work your way back to the right molar. Okay, that's one method which was mentioned explicitly by the imams of our madhab. It's also recommended to use oil on the body and in the hair from time to time. The scholars have explained this to mean every other day. As the Prophet ﷺ prohibited combing the hair every day. It's reported by Imam al-Nasa'i and at-Tirmidhi. Prohibited combing the hair every day, but it's something that should be done every other day. And it's also recommended to apply kuhl. Everyone should be familiar with kuhl and what that is. To apply kuhl at night before sleeping, and done so in odd numbers. So basically an odd number, like 3 on each eye, 3 kind of like applications on each eye. Move on, the Imam, he says, وَيَجِبُ خِتَانُ ذَكَرٍ وَأُنْثَى عِنْدَ بَلُوغٍ مَا لَمْ يَخَفْ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ وَزَمَنَ صِغَارٍ أَفْضَلٍ وَيُكْرَهُ الْقَزَعُ وَثَقْبُ أُذُنِ صَبِيٍّ وَنَتْفُ شَيْبٍ وَتَغْيِيرُهُ بِسَوَادٍ وَسُنَّ اسْتِحْدَادٌ وَحَفُّ شَارِبٍ وَتَقْلِيمُ ظُفْرٍ وَنَتْفُ إِبِطٍ وَحَرُمَ نَمْسٌ وَوَشْرٌ وَوَشْمٌ. Okay, وَحَرُمَ نَمْسٌ وَوَشْرٌ وَوَشْمٌ. Here we're talking about some impermissible and some disliked things as well. Imam al-Buhuti says, during early childhood, is preferred, circumcision is obligatory for both male and female, as well as hermaphrodite, which is based, and this is kind of a precautionary measure, is based on a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ told a man who embraced Islam to cut the hair of kufr and get circumcised, reported by Imam Abu Dawud. And there's another hadith which proves the obligatory nature of circumcision for women, in which the Prophet ﷺ, he said, when the two circumcised parts meet, meaning this is during intercourse, ghusl is obligatory. Okay? It's reported by Imam Ahmad. So circumcision becomes obligatory at the age of maturity. Before that, it's preferred, it's recommended, as he opens up with. At the age of maturity, meaning puberty, that's when it becomes obligatory, because before that, the child is not mukallaf. They're not morally responsible and obliged. But just after puberty, they must see to that if it has not already been done. Now, it's preferred obviously when they're younger so that they're less likely to remember, and it's more than likely going to heal faster. It's kind of like rahmah, have a little mercy with one another and take care of that as parents. Of course, this is so long as they do not fear for themselves, meaning to go through such an operation. If they do fear that something would go terribly wrong, the obligation is foregone and no longer required. Now, circumcision for men is achieved by removing the entire foreskin of the penis. And for women, it's done by removing the clitoral hood, or I should say, not removing. It is done through clitoral hood reduction, okay? Because it's recommended not to remove the entire hood. And this is explicitly mentioned by Imam Ahmed. This is also known as a hoodectomy. Again, that procedure, it is a procedure that is done today, believe it or not, in modern medicine and in female health and hygiene. And there are multiple benefits for doing that. If you're interested, obviously you should research the topic, because I know that it is one of controversy, because typically it's associated with genital mutilation. Now, in Islam, mutilation is not permissible, either to the living or the deceased. You cannot mutilate the body. And so we're not talking about mutilating a man or a woman's body. We're talking about something very specific that is of benefit. Now, if, for example, a man is born without that foreskin, then obviously there's no operation to be done. And it's not even recommended to just like ceremonially run a razor over that part of the body. And if a woman is born and the clitoral hood is either non-existent or insufficient to go through with the procedure, meaning that there's only enough left that if you went through with it, you'd have to remove it all, then obviously there's nothing to do in that case either. So that's something that should be understood very well and clear. He goes on and he says, shaving part of the head, al-qaza' is what it's called, shaving part of the head, such that a part is shaved with a razor. Here we're not talking about using a trimmer, and shortening the hair. We're actually talking about using a razor such that you shave a part of the head and you leave the rest of the hair. You shave the sides and you leave the top. You shave the top and you leave the sides, or you shave the front and you leave the back. Okay, so here are like 4 different examples of how that could happen and occur. Now today, most popular is shaving the sides and leaving the top. There are religions that shave the top and leave the sides, and these are for like monks. So this is something which is considered disliked, as is piercing boys' ears, young boys' ears, but not girls. Young girls can have their ears pierced because there is a need for adornment. Females may need, you can't say that this is like a fundamental, natural occurring need, as if a female is not attractive or beautiful enough. But culturally, women use jewelry to adorn themselves, whether it's necklaces or rings or earrings. And so for that reason, it's permissible for young women to have or young girls to have their ears pierced. For boys, it's not, because boys and men culturally do not adorn themselves in such a manner. And some of the scholars would consider that, in fact, imitation of women, which is impermissible in Islam. It goes on and says, in plucking gray hair, because the Prophet ﷺ prohibited it and said it is the light of Islam, and whoever goes gray in Islam, it will be a light for them on the day of the resurrection. Or dyeing it black as well. These are all disliked things. Dyeing the beard black hides that light, and it could possibly lead to deception. And if it does lead to deception, then it is impermissible. So a person that has some gray hair, right, or is fully gray in the beard, and a man who dyes that beard and then now presents himself to get married, it may come across and be deceiving that they're younger than they actually are. Or that you have this very, like I should say, dark hair, this appearance, which is naturally occurring when in fact it is not. It is, however, permissible to dye gray hairs with red henna, or dark red, almost, it becomes extremely dark reddish color is also permissible to use if one wants to dye their hair. Shaving the head is not disliked entirely, by the way. Shaving the head is not disliked, though it was not reported that the Prophet ﷺ shaved his head for any other purpose other than Hajj rites or Umrah rituals. Growing hair, therefore, is considered something recommended, and men can grow their hair to their shoulders or even a little bit longer. And for women, it's actually disliked that they shave their head or shorten their hair without need. That's part of a woman's beauty as well. Like the beard is a part of a man's beauty, long hair is a part of a woman's beauty. Unless there's a need, then it's considered disliked to shave or to shorten. It's also recommended to shave the pubic region or remove that hair with scissors or hair removal creams. Hair removal creams is something that was introduced by the great prophet Sulaiman ibn Dawood alayhi salam, and was also something done by Imam Ahmad himself, as has been narrated. It's also recommended to trim the mustache very short to the point that you can see the skin under the hair, or to remove the hair that grows over the lip, which is more of like what you see here. It's recommended to clip the fingernails of both the toes, the nails of both the fingers and the toes, and this is done by skipping every other finger. So one starts with the right hand, and they begin with their pinky, middle finger, and then thumb, and then they come back to the ring finger and conclude with the index finger, and then they move to the left hand, beginning with the thumb, middle finger, pinky, index finger, and then ring finger. And this is based on a hadith which the Prophet ﷺ indicated to do such. It's also recommended to then wash the fingernails after clipping in order to complete the purification and cleansing process. It's also recommended to pluck armpit hair or to shave it if plucking is difficult to do. All of these things that are mentioned, recommendations, shaving the pubic region, trimming the mustache, clipping the nails, plucking the armpit hair, are recommended to be done before Jumu'ah prayer on a weekly basis, and are disliked to leave them beyond 40 days. Now, all of this stuff that you remove from the body, the hair, the nails, and even if there's blood, all of this should be buried. Much like how we handle a dead body, we bury it. These things that have been separated from the body should also be buried. I'm going to conclude here with some final thoughts. Plucking facial hair, filing teeth, and tattooing are impermissible, haram. Plucking facial hair, filing teeth. Filing teeth means to create a gap or to reshape them in some way. And tattooing are all impermissible. Everyone knows tattooing. It might not be the exact method that was done during those days. Very similar. They used to use henna. They would manipulate the skin for it to kind of puncture it enough that there would be blood drawn, and then they would mix that with the henna and it would be inserted into that wound, and that would create design, much like the tattooing process today. It should be noted that that process, which draws blood and mixes it with the ink and then is injected back into the skin, some of the scholars have noted that this is actually hamil najasa. Now the blood has been pulled out and put back in, and so now you're carrying around najasa within that marking. And so it would be an obligation to have that removed, those tattoos removed, if it didn't bring about greater harm to the person through the process. Note this, Imam Ibn al-Jawzi from the Hanabila, he's one of the great Imams of the Hanbali school, was the only one to permit plucking the facial hair. Now this issue often is restricted to plucking eyebrows, but it's talking about facial hair in the madhab, not just eyebrows. Eyebrows are an issue, obviously, because they are included in facial hair, but here we're talking about facial hair in general. In Al-Ghunya, which was by the great Imam Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, rahimahullah ta'ala, radiyallahu anhu, says there is possible permission, right? It does make sense in a way that if the husband requests his wife to remove such facial hair for purposes of adornment, then it becomes permissible, because really at this point there's no deception. It's known that the woman may have, some facial hair, and that might be a turnoff for the husband. And in that event, he can ask her to remove that, maybe the brows or the face, if she has facial hair growing, like a mustache or type, a beard hairs or something, which does happen. It is naturally occurring. In order to, present herself in a very beautiful way, she is allowed to do that according to, this type of logical conclusion. This, however, is not the case for a man. So if a woman, the wife comes and says, hey, look, I want you to remove your beard or your mustache or something of that nature because it looks better, then this is not an exception that is made for men. These are obligations that have to be maintained regardless of the opinions of others.